On Tuesday, Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated reported that Max Scherzer has told the Mets that his preference would be for them to hire Buck Showalter as their next manager. On today's show, I was joined by Pat as we discussed everything going on right now in the Mets search for a new skipper for the 2022 season.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So really happy today to be joined by Pat Ragazzo, Mets beat writer for Sports Illustrated. He's joined us many times before, but he had a report today that is gaining a lot of traction right now. As we are now focused on the Mets manager search, it seems like there's a name that at least has a pretty prominent endorsement in Buck Showalter. So I just wanted to start there, Pat. What is your latest reporting telling you about the Mets search for a new manager?
Right. Good question. And thanks, Ryan, for having me. Always a pleasure to be here. So I heard from multiple sources around the league today that Max Scherzer has made it known to the Mets that his preference is for them to hire Buck Showalter to be the next skipper. Now, the Mets started their managerial search yesterday as far as the interview process is concerned, and they're believed to be ready to interview or have already interviewed Brad Ausmus, Matt Quacharo, Don Kelly, Buck Showalter, and Joe Espada. Bob Guerin was also added to the list today, as SNY reported. So we know the list of names. We know who's going to be interviewed this week. Billy Eppler and the baseball staff are handling the first round, and Steve Cohen is going to come in, for the final round of interviews. But right now, this is Epler's charge that he's leading. On another hand, the word around baseball is also that Steve Cohen apparently has also told Eppler that Showalter is his preference as well. And that was, of course, reported by Mike Marino this morning, as I'm sure you saw. So right now it does look, Buck Showalter's gotten a number of ringing endorsements from Adam Jones to Terry Collins to now Scherzer, behind the scenes. So, it only seems inevitable at this point that, Buck is obviously one of the names at the top of the list, and he has a very strong chance of obviously coming to the Mets. So really, the two names I've been hearing since last Friday to keep an eye on, at least in this race, have been Buck Showalter and Astros bench coach Joe Espada, who's obviously another strong candidate.
Yeah, I think Joe Espada has been a hot manager candidate for some time, but just to focus a little more on Buck, you also had something in that article you put up for SI, which I will include in the description on YouTube and also on the podcast feed. People can check that out. But you mentioned that Billy Eppler was pushing for Buck Showalter back with the Angels. So what did you find out about that and how Art Moreno maybe got in the way of that hire after he let go of Brad Ausmus, who was also in the running to be the Mets manager this time as well?
Right. So Eppler hired Brad Ausmus prior to the 2019 season. The Angels wound up going 70-92, and Artie Moreno stepped in and had Eppler fire Ausmus after one season and pressured him to win now, basically dangling his job security in front of the former GM of the Angels. And Eppler told Artie Moreno, if you want to win now, you'll hire Buck Showalter. And instead, Artie Moreno took it into his own hands and hired Joe Maddon to take over as skipper of the club. So now, fast forward to the Mets, and obviously Eppler and Showalter, they have a strong connection. Everybody who they know in the industry respects one another. Buck Showalter, I'd mentioned that on MLB Network, where he's an analyst that everyone he knows around the game thinks the world of Billy Eppler as someone who's going to compete, who cares. Buck Showalter has pretty much all but said that he's, interested at least in the job and working with Eppler. Because remember, Showalter was the manager of the Yankees from 1992 to 1995. And during that time, Gene Stick Michael was the GM of the Yankees. And we'll go all the way to 2004, 2005. Showalter was already pretty far removed from the Yankees, but Eppler came in as a scout and then was promoted to director of scouting. And then, rose to the ranks all the way to assistant GM at the end of his tenure with the Yankees organization. And during that time, Gene Michael, who was retired at that point, but was obviously, semi-involved with the team, was one of Epler's biggest influencers throughout the early portion of his career. So that I think is an important connection there. And between that and then what we've heard about Epler wanting to hire Showalter following the 2019 season and Artie Moreno, nixing that idea, all the signs kind of point to Showalter again being a pretty strong candidate with the Mets.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and the Max Scherzer vote of confidence obviously is going to have some pull. I mean, he just got $130 million. Has a relationship forming with Steve Cohen. If Steve Cohen's already leaning that way, it's almost confirmation bias when you hear Max Scherzer also kind of pointing toward Buck Showalter. And I've seen a couple people point out that Scherzer doesn't have any direct connection to Buck Showalter as far as he didn't play for him, but it's kind of a weird comp. But I'm a Miami Heat fan. And if you remember the Big Three era, the first year of the Big Three, they had a 9-8 start to that season, and there was rumblings they would fire their head coach. And LeBron James reportedly wanted Pat Riley to come down from that top seat and be the coach. And Riley was basically done with that. He ended up winning 21 of the next 22. The rest is history for that team. But the point being that a player of the caliber of LeBron James or in baseball and Max Scherzer is going to have respect for a manager as accomplished as Buck Showalter, as compared to someone, I'm not exactly sure how old Joe Espada is, 46. I mean, Joe Espada has been around for a long time. I'm not saying Scherzer wouldn't respect him, but there is that difference there where Joe Espada is, 7 years older or maybe 9 years older than Max Scherzer, as opposed to Buck Showalter, who has this long tenure and long history in Major League Baseball and a great reputation.
Yeah, of course. And just based off the moves the Mets have made, it's been win now. They've committed $254.5 million to 4 free agents and 4 veteran free agents. So I think at this point, they just got rid of a manager who was learning on the job and, maybe was in there a little too prematurely than for when he was ready for. And Luis Rojas, who was 40 years old by the time the Mets fired him after his second season. So Espada, of course, does have more experience as a bench coach. I mean, Rojas wasn't even a bench coach at the major league level prior to receiving the opportunity with the Mets. But Espada's been interviewed by, I believe, the Cubs. He's been interviewed by the Giants over the last couple of years. The A's are set to interview him as well. And again, he's highly respected. He's learned under A.J. Hinch. He's learned under Dusty Baker. He was a special assistant to Brian Cashman and Billy Eppler back in 2014 with the Yankees before becoming the Yankees' third base coach for a number of years. So he is a qualified candidate. But again, the Mets are about to hire their 4th manager in the last 5 years. And given the roster they've already put together, mixed with the veterans and the younger guys, it kind of seems like a veteran experienced manager is the best fit right now. And that would be the 65-year-old Buck Showalter. So again, both guys are strong candidates, but Showalter, honestly, I think from my perspective makes the most sense for the Mets right now.
I think also if you look at this idea, right, that with analytics, maybe you need the younger manager who understands that and all those different things that we hear whenever a manager vacancy comes up. But at the same time, we see with the Houston Astros, they're managed by Dusty Baker. And I mean, obviously, that was a situation where they had AJ Hinch. AJ Hinch had to get let go because of the sign stealing scandal. Dusty comes in a weird circumstance, but he's still holding this job. That's still an analytically driven franchise that just won a ton of games under Dusty Baker. So this notion that an old school manager can adapt, I think is probably a little bit overblown as well.
Yeah, and the thing there is that people kind of miss, I guess, because they assume because of his age that Buck Showalter and his style, I guess, is old school, that he's not open or into analytics. That's just not the case. From everything I've heard is that Buck Showalter is a manager who is very much into analytics and was using analytics towards the end of his tenure with the Baltimore Orioles. And as Terry Collins said on SNY's Baseball Night in New York last night, he said nobody's going to dot the I's and cross the T's, more than Buck Showalter. He's always prepared. He knows what he's going to do from before the first inning, what he's going to do late in the game when certain situations come up. And all the analytics, the data, everything is given to him as a roadmap. And Billy Eppler said it on the introductory press conference last week with Starling Marte, Mark Canha, and Eduardo Escobar regarding the managerial search, that obviously it's a roadmap for the analytics and the data given to the manager, but it's up to the manager to make those in-game adjustments in real life, during the game as he sees them. Of course, the map doesn't account for a fallen tree or a bear or a fire. That's where the manager and the coaching staff comes in. So that's why I think that Buck Showalter will be able to collaborate with Eppler and Ben Zalsmer in the analytics department and the entire Mets front office, while also having the latitude to make those adjustments, make those lineup matchups. And he's going to have pretty good reign there. And at the same time, Buck's a guy who's still going to be utilizing that detailed data and analytic information that he receives day in and day out. So again, just because he's old school, it doesn't mean that he's not adaptable and that he isn't accustomed to analytics, because he's fully aware of what comes along with being the manager nowadays. And it's definitely something that I believe that he can do and is willing to do and has done in the past.
This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or even better, and that is Built Bar, which is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavors, covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, but high in protein. So you get the best of both worlds. Delicious and healthy. So many flavors to choose from, whether it is the raspberry, mint brownie, cherry, double chocolate. You have my absolute personal favorite, which is cookies and cream, or the peanut butter brownie, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Built Bar has so many flavors to choose from that you're going to want to go to built.com. Try a mixed box. It is perfect for stocking stuffers. Give all your different family members different flavors from that mixed box. Perfect to get them trying Built Bar, which will give you that extra fuel you need to get through your day. So throw one in your jacket or purse. You never know when you're going to need it. And here is another delicious treat they have. If you like some marshmallowy flavors around the holidays, you can get your Built Bar Puffs. They're light, fluffy, and marshmallowy through and through. Different flavors, all covered in chocolate. They taste so good, and you will not believe that they are still filled with that protein. So here is what you got to do right now if you want to try some Built Bars. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Yeah, I think one of the things that I actually already recorded Thursday's episode with Brian Wright. We do our Throwback Thursday segment. So we were talking about the top 5 managers in Mets history, and one of the names we discussed is Willie Randolph. And I think if you look at that team, 2005, 2006, just a star-studded roster, and I think Willie Randolph was perfect for that team because he had been a star. He had been in New York. He was able to handle all the media and all the pressure that came with it, and he had a team that respected him. So if you fast forward to now with Buck Showalter, certainly understands New York, certainly has, managed a bunch of star players. I don't think he'll be intimidated at all by stepping into a clubhouse that'll have Francisco Lindor, Max Scherzer, Jacob deGrom, Pete Alonso, Starling Marte, all these different personalities. I think in that sense, having that experience should really pan out if the Mets ultimately go this route.
Right. And you mentioned Showalter and Willie Randolph. I mean, Showalter's already coming along. Unlike Willie Randolph, who it was his first managerial gig, Showalter is coming along with 20 years experience, three-time award winner of Manager of the Year. He already has the respect of the players in the clubhouse, the veterans and the younger guys, to whereas Espada has the reputation around the game, and guys I'm sure are going to be open to getting to know him and respecting him, but he doesn't come along with the respect right away like Buck Showalter does, and I think that's the difference in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I do think that and where I'm sitting here, it's hard for me to criticize that as a hire, especially with the way this organization has been in such flux the last couple of years. Getting an established manager who's not going to be learning on the job is something that is really attractive. When do you think this process, like how long is this interview process going to pan out? I've seen some say by the end of next week. I've seen this week. How long do you think this is going to take for the Mets to come to a decision?
Right. So I've seen two different reports that the Post, I believe, said it was going to be the end of this week, but then SNY said end of next week. So sometimes when you hear two different things, could be somewhere in the middle. So I'm not really sure. I mean, they don't have to rush. I mean, the lockout just started last Thursday, and the Mets have plenty of time. So I assume this to be cleared up in the next couple of weeks, I guess, at least based off what we're hearing. But again, if the Mets are going to do their due diligence and talk to, they should talk to a lot of candidates and kind of weigh their options. But at the same time, there's obviously, some front runners at the top of the list. And if the owner and some of the players are kind of made up, and if Epler's, that's also important too, obviously, is if Epler's mind is made up, then there's really no reason, I guess, to linger, along with this process. So it should be cleared up within the next week or two, I imagine, realistically.
And then, of course, from there, the new manager with Billy Eppler will be building out the coaching staff, and that's kind of the main Mets news we can expect early on in this lockout period. While we're waiting to see what happens there, BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using the promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. I want to talk to you a little bit about Billy Eppler because the last time I had you on, we were discussing, if I'm not mistaken, this hire. And one of the things that you mentioned was, I think you might have said something along the lines of having an adult in the room, having someone who has experience. And whether Billy Eppler was on the top of any of our lists at the start of this search, I think what has been made clear as they needed to hire someone to jump right into a rampant free agency, Billy Eppler seems to me at this point like the perfect hire because he was able to hit the ground running in all those talks with the free agents and seamlessly sign a bunch of guys in a really tight window.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, Billy Eppler was not even mentioned until further, kind of far along in the Mets search. And once his name was identified, he wasn't initially even, seen as that serious of a candidate because a lot of people look at what he did with the Angels. And of course, it's not easy to operate under meddling ownership. And, he was also pressured to win now. But at the same time, he brought Shohei Ohtani over here from the NPB. He wound up locking down Mike Trout to a historic extension. He signed Justin Upton. He signed Anthony Rendon. He made some big moves. He has experience. He's well respected among agents. He's well respected among, players and executives and everyone else who knows him around the league. So again, the Mets, even though the Mets were shooting high as they should have for their executive search, they kind of landed on a guy who, made sense from the beginning, despite, not having that specific winning track record as a GM. He does have the experience that the Mets required for this position. Again, the fact that Eppler is an experienced hire who they brought in at the GM makes me think that, along with the moves they made in free agency so far and the moves they're probably anticipating on making after the lockout, tells me that it does make sense for this team to go after that veteran manager and pair him with Eppler and someone who Eppler respects and vice versa. And again, as we've been talking about on this show, Buck Showalter is the name that sticks out, of course. And then I'm not going to discredit Joe Espada, based off his, relationship with Eppler and, his reputation and everything. But again, somebody who has the respect already and has the track record, I should say, probably should be who they should seriously consider in the process.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've liked about Billy Eppler is, with Brody Van Wagen, we heard we're going to win now, win into the future, and all these things. But to me, Billy Eppler, if you were paying attention to that introductory press conference, he has followed through with the exact thing he laid out there, which is where he was talking about how with the Angels, he came into a situation where the farm system wasn't necessarily great. There were some big contracts on the books. And so he tried to build out through free agency on short-term deals that wouldn't hamstring the team too much into the future. And with the Mets, we've seen him do exactly that at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, Starling Marte, the longest contract they've given out. Do you think that is still the strategy moving forward as we get to the other side of this CBA? When people are dreaming about Chris Bryant and some of these other big free agents, are they still going to be focused on winning now in a short window with the bloated payroll to hopefully build out a farm system? So in 3 to 4 years, you don't necessarily have to have a $350 million payroll to win.
Yeah, so Eppler even said it last week. I mean, they're still going to be opportunistic about certain players. Obviously, Chris Bryant is the biggest name bat left on the market right now, not named Correa or Story. So Again, yeah, the Mets are going to look for, the right opportunities. Obviously, they have to take into account of not hamstringing themselves in the long term with these bloated contracts. At the same time, the moves that they've made and the money that they've spent, you don't do that to just kind of not go all the way in if you're going to. And at the same time, it is, again, their duty to make sure that they don't minimize their long-term World Series odds for a short-term gain. So again, by that, it's not hamstringing themselves in the long term with these bloated deals, because they do have some prospects coming up, and Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, Ronnie Mauricio, who could contribute to the club within the next 2 years or so. So that's again why I think that they signed Eduardo Escobar on that short-term deal, to play third base. Another reason with Bryant, I mean, I was talking to a lot of agents and some execs around the league too, who said, don't count out Steve Cohen. I mean, with Steve Cohen, anything's possible. Like if he wants Chris Bryant, he'll get him. But at the same time, Chris Bryant isn't necessarily a fit, because he would slide right in at third base in the short term. Escobar would have to go play second, and Escobar already said his preference is to play third. So they'd have to do that in the infield. And then obviously once Beatty or Vientos or whoever is ready and they come up and they want to play third, then Bryant would have to move to a corner outfield spot, which again, he's not great defensively at third, and he's not very good defensively in the outfield as well. So unless you're planning on having him as a long-term DH, if the NL is awarded one, then I don't really see where he fits defensively. But at the same time, like the Mets, they likely the front office is going over, the players on this roster they have right now and who's primed for a bounce back and who's not, between Jeff McNeil, Dom Smith, James McCann, and Francisco Lindor. And I think out of that group, I think McNeil and Lindor are most likely to have, bounce back years and get back to the offensive players that they've, we're used to seeing. I mean, Lindor showed that down the stretch of the season. He had a great September, 9 homers, 25 RBIs, and upwards of 900 OPS, partially with Baez, in the mix, kind of uplifted his play, having Baez protecting him in the order. And then Jeff McNeil obviously had a rough year, but he came into 2021 as a career 319 hitter. He was an all-star in 2019. So there is reason to still believe in his bat. But again, yeah, like signing a Bryant or another big bat would make the Mets an offensive juggernaut. So obviously that's a thing to look at. And then at the same time, they need they need a starting pitcher, I would say, and they need multiple relievers. And I was actually reading a Buck Showalter quote where he said how important pitching is. So I imagine if Buck is their manager, that's something they're going to focus on too, is making sure they beef up the pitching staff and cover themselves, because you saw it last summer. We all saw it last summer. The Mets ran out of pitching depth, even though they built it in the offseason. That just so many guys got injured. They lost Jacob deGrom. They ran out of arms, and obviously they need to cover themselves to make sure that doesn't happen again this year.
Yeah, they do for sure. I think that's, in my opinion, where they had to focus. I think if you look right now, Jeff McNeil can be your starting second baseman, and your starting lineup is honestly already kind of set with the additions you've already made. Would you like to add another bat in the middle of the lineup? Of course you would, but I don't necessarily think that is the top priority at this moment. The last question I want to ask you, as it relates to Jeff McNeil, how much stock do you put into this idea that he can't fit into the clubhouse? I know there was a report. It seemed like someone who had just left the Mets talked about the raccoon and the rat situation, and there's been a lot made about his relationship with Francisco Lindor. What's your sense as far as the Mets moving forward with Jeff McNeil in that clubhouse?
What concerns me was obviously that story that came out after the fact, about him not complying with the shifting, and with him and Lindor not having great chemistry up the middle, and not having a great relationship there, because that's extremely important. Your defense up the middle is extremely important, and that's why it hurts even more that Javier Baez is not going to be a New York Met moving forward, is because, how much improved that double play combo was between that pair. So I'm not sure how much truth there is to that story that we heard, but obviously it's a little concerning hearing that McNeil wouldn't comply and that him and Lindor, had their differences, because of that. And at that point, when I remember reading that story, I believe back in October, and at that point I said, all right, well, like there's really no way that the Mets could have Jeff McNeil play second base again, and have his double play partner be Francisco Lindor. So I guess we'll see what happens in this offseason. I mean, if McNeil goes into the season as a starting second baseman, then we know that that story probably wasn't 100% true, maybe. I mean, again, I don't know, but and I don't know how they think and how they kind of map out, those situations. But again, it would kind of be puzzling to have McNeil unless he complies, unless they tell him that he has to comply with the shifting, which he should, and everyone kind of bought in and improved a number of guys defensively, whether it was Brandon Nimmo or Dom Smith or Francisco Lindor. Obviously had a great year defensively as well, but he had the reputation for it, back in Cleveland. So again, if for McNeil, it's either get with the program or don't. And if he doesn't, then he'll probably find himself, sent out of town packing, which would be a shame because we've seen the guy's potential, in the early part of his career. He was a very high contact rate hitter, and he's hard nosed and he's versatile, like a super utility guy. So again, I'm sure going to be motivated this offseason to do everything in his power to have a bounce back year and show that he can still hit, because if there's one thing you can't accuse McNeil of, it's caring. And he's someone who wears his heart on his sleeve. And again, he cares, he's going to put the work in. It's just a matter of, can he make the adjustments as the league made those adjustments to him, which is why he had a down year last year, along with the coaching. I'll be fair enough that obviously removing Chili Davis early on and bringing in a minor league hitting coordinator, a minor league assistant hitting coach to work with your major leaguers when they had no chemistry together. They didn't know each other. They didn't know the strengths and weaknesses of the players. It was never going to work out, especially during the season when there's no time to adjust and to get to know each other. So, again, I don't necessarily put last year on McNeil and some of the other hitters as much as I do as the Mets process that they tried to change and put in place. So, again, the coaching is going to be a big part of it. And, we're going to see who bounces it back and who doesn't next season.
Absolutely. I think I said in the past, I think Jeff McNeil can win a batting title, and I still believe that. And we'll see if that's in a Mets uniform or another uniform. We'll see how everything else shakes out with the coaching hire and as the Mets try to cap off what's been a very strong offseason, at least for the first couple of weeks. Thank you, as always, Pat, for joining me. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find your work?
Thanks, Ryan. So, you guys can follow me at Ragazzo Report, Ragazzo Report on Twitter and Instagram. And you can check out my website for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation, Inside the Mets. That's si.com/MLB/Mets. So thanks a lot for having me on. It was great talking Mets with you as always, and enjoy the holidays.
That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show for a Throwback Thursday, I was once again joined by Mets author Brian Wright as we talk about the top 5 managers in Mets history, one of them being Gil Hodges, who was just inducted into the Hall of Fame. So we go into detail about that. Make sure you tune in, hit subscribe to get a notification if you're watching on YouTube for when that next episode goes live. Anyway, though, that is all. Thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Not for your second listen. Check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get your daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.